always, when you go through a great threshold into something that is unknown, always fear arises. And so we can either be held captive by it or pretend we don't have it, or we can use fear as a beckoning to say, yes, here is your threshold. This fear holds aliveness. This fear has life power in it. And if we dare to step through that threshold, we step into greater love. We step into something that we know so deeply in our hearts and in our bones because it's encoded in us. It's like a stamp seal. That love is within you. It's just been held captive. So fear is not the enemy. Fear is just the invitation. Walk through, and greater life shall be given unto you. And when I always like to test things in real life. And that puts me sometimes into situations that I'm like, what the heck has happened now? But I think when I truly met that, well, my fear, and I was tested many times, one of the stories I want to tell you because I think it resonates with the theme for today, Women Rising, Love Unleashed. But also it gives a roadmap that has, I used that roadmap to apply it pretty much to everything. And I fared very well with it. And it comes, the story I tell you happened like when I was 24. So now I'm far older. And luckily you can't see my wrinkles so much on the screen. But I'm much older than that. So I was about 24 and I was already on a spiritual path for a long, long time, already since I was 14. And I was called to go trips into the jungle, to fly from Germany to find a tribe of indigenous people where I could learn from. I don't know where that idea came from, but I definitely had to follow that call. And so at some point let's take the scene where I end up in the Amazon. And I had no idea where I would find an indigenous tribe in the jungle. And there were no tours at that time. So there was a little raggedy boat and some Spanish people, guys. And I said, well, where would I find a tribe in the jungle? And they laughed at me, of course. Me, little young woman with a big backpack. And then they said, well, we'll just take you. So I went into this boat, and along the river, I was so excited about, the jungle and the sounds and the incredible aliveness there. And luckily, that didn't take me anywhere else. That just took me along that river. And at some point, they said, here, you get out and you'll find your way. So they let me out of that river and out of the boat, and I trudged along in the jungle, and I wondered, where's the way? There is no way. Night was falling, and the jungle becomes very alive, and not just with the nicest creatures. And at some point I was like, oh, this is scary. What if I get lost in the jungle? Where do I sleep? There's snakes, there's spiders, there's a lot of things in there that I was glad not to be able to see, because long story short, I arrive in this little place. Suddenly something guided me inside. In this village, I mean, it was just huts and with this indigenous tribe. And mainly we talked by hands and by sounds because I didn't understand them and they didn't understand me. But there was one shaman, old woman. She was, you really could see her face so wrinkled, the tooth, there was only a few teeth left. And she had such a chutzpah, it's the Jewish word, you know, feistiness, laughter. And I knew she had a depth of wisdom that I really, really could learn from. So it was many hand gestures, and she then said, yeah, she understands some Spanish. And I asked her if she would train me. And she took me under her wing. And again, 2 months went by, and I don't want to fill the whole webinar with that story. I want to get to the point where I finally had a test, and it was my initiation. She called it. She said, it's time. And her training has been really rigorous. And a lot had to do with facing fears and uniting with that pulse of life. But when she told me a true shaman initiation is life or death, and I said, well, fine, I'm not afraid of death. You know, when you're young and you think you're not afraid of death and everything is cool. And I was like, oh, it's no problem. I'm not terrified. It's all fine. Let's go ahead. And she blindfolded me and walked me further into the heart of the jungle. And I could feel this was going to be intense. And she only said, look, you only have seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes, maybe max 3 minutes, that either you succumb to fear and die, or you will live. I thought, well, bring it on. And then what happened was something I never anticipated. It was a shock to my system. It was a shock to my whole being. I heard behind me footsteps. And still, my eyes blindfolded. And I started getting nervous. And you know, this mix of nervousness and excitement, well, it starts sending the shivers down my spine. And suddenly these footsteps were really close. And then an enormous weight was dropped onto my shoulders and I sunk to my knees. And I was like, I held my breath. You know, when you get afraid in the first moment, you hold your breath. Well, bad idea. And the person behind me ripped off my blindfold. And I certainly didn't breathe in that moment. I held my breath even harder. In front of me, just coming up to my face, was a huge snake and hissing at me. And the weight from the snake was humongous. And I realized it's an anaconda snake. Heavy, huge. And at the same time, my shaman shouted laughingly, said, she's hungry. And I froze. I just did this. She said, remember the seconds? And the snake kept coming closer because, you know, if you don't know about anaconda snakes, they wrap themselves around their victims and squeeze them to death. Well, that anaconda snake was going for lunch and I was going to be it. And in that moment, I realized, okay, holy cow, this is this is so extreme that I just want to crawl out of my skin, run away, and never be born. I was terrified, absolutely terrified, out of my wits. But I couldn't stay in that fear, but I also couldn't rise above it. Nothing helped other than I did what I had learned. Breathe out, long breath out. Feel my feet on the ground. And maybe you want to do that with me when you hear the story, just to feel the feet, to feel the weight dropping down to the ground and feeling the ground holding you. And then becoming present, like really looking around. Okay, so what's around me? There is the tree. There's more than just the anaconda snake. There's the sky just shining a little bit through, and the wet, moist heat to allow some spaciousness. And I acknowledged my fear. Yes, I have fear, and I'm bigger than that. And here's the snake coming towards me. At pretty much at this point, she was going for kill. She was like right here. And I knew one thing had to happen. I had to open my heart to feel the love, the connection to her. Now, how do you do that in a moment when you're about to be killed? The only thing I knew how to trust was my heart. And I said, I cannot feel any love right now. But I remembered there is that love that was for animals, for the planet, for the divine. I just let that flicker. I focused on that flicker in my heart and let it expand through my body, through my heart, and to see in the eyes of the snake, to see her as something exquisitely beautiful, as the divine embodied as snake. I could feel that connect. That was that spark of connection. When in that moment, the snake stopped hissing. She immediately responded. It was uncanny. And slowly, slowly, dropping her head down and laying her head, I was terrified of snakes before, laying her head right on my belly. And in that moment, I sunk to the ground, sitting myself with that snake cross-legged, and she wrapped herself, curled herself in, and literally closed her eyes and fell asleep in my lap. And I was in awe. I was just in awe, and I felt this love for her, but at the same time, I could feel her gift, that enormity of life power, that feminine power that was so much bigger than my head and my story, my life. It was just, and I felt this intense connectedness, total aliveness and oneness with her. She takes a nap for a while, and I just being with her in that connected field. And then at some point, she slowly unfurled herself from me. And I think she just went for getting a real prey that she could eat, and slithered away. And in that moment, my old shaman lady clapped her hands and said, "You did it. You came through." And that was, when the village celebrated, and I knew in that moment something incredible had happened that was so natural, but at the same time, that was so forgotten inside of me. But I never, ever after that forgot it. I always can feel that life power now. Something had opened. Even though I had meditated for many, many years, it was It was like that was the portal to walk through that fear and connect to that life force that I could feel is the feminine that we have buried and cemented down, and that life power that we get so afraid of, like the huge tidal waves and the storms. Of course, there's something inside of it that wants to control this, that wants to make sure that it goes the way we want it. But it doesn't anymore. Life has its own intelligence. And I really could feel the enormity of love's intelligence. I just, afterwards, I just could only bow to that, because I could feel that all we did was just disconnect from that. But it's here, always inviting us, step in, step over that cliff, over that edge that's yours. And it will always guide us to something that feels home, that feels true. And to an even, what I feel, a greater love that right now in our world is so needed, because it is the greatest power of all.